What happens when Hollywood's most intimidating legend faces off against late-night television's most provocative host? In just 43 seconds, a single comment would shatter years of carefully built reputation and expose the ugly truth behind the cameras. This is the story of how Bill Maher's arrogance finally met its match, and why Robert De Niro walked away as the last man standing. The green room backstage buzzed with the usual pre-show energy. Robert De Niro sat quietly in the corner, his weathered hands folded in his lap, reviewing his talking points for what should have been a straightforward interview about his latest film. At 79 years old, the legendary actor had seen it all, done it all, and survived decades in an industry that chewed up most people and spat them out. But tonight felt different. Something was off. Bill Maher strutted into the green room like he owned not just the studio, but the entire building. His signature smirk was already plastered across his face as he approached De Niro with the kind of fake enthusiasm that made seasoned actors cringe. "Bobby, there he is, the king himself," Maher announced, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that he mistook for charm. "Ready to talk some sense into my audience tonight?" De Niro looked up slowly, his piercing eyes meeting Maher's with the kind of intensity that had made him famous in movies like Taxi Driver and Goodfellas. "It's Robert," he said quietly, his Brooklyn accent cutting through the artificial atmosphere. "And I'm here to talk about my film. Nothing else." Maher laughed, the kind of laugh that never reached his eyes. "Come on, Robert, don't be so serious. This is real time, not some stuffy press junket. We like to have fun here, mix things up a little, get controversial." The word controversial hung in the air like a threat. De Niro had been in this business long enough to recognize a setup when he heard one. Maher wasn't interested in discussing his decades of method acting or his latest directorial effort. He wanted sound bites, drama, something that would trend on social media and boost his ratings. "I said I'm here to talk about my film," De Niro repeated, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had commanded respect on countless movie sets. "That's what we agreed on." Maher waved his hand dismissively, his gold watch catching the harsh fluorescent lights of the green room. "Details. Details. Look, Robert, between you and me, your film is fine, but nobody really cares about another mob movie. What they want to hear is what you really think about things that matter." The insult landed like a slap across De Niro's face. 40 years of dedication to his craft, 8 Academy Award nominations, 2 wins. And this talk show host was dismissing his work like it was amateur hour at a community theater. De Niro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "My films matter," De Niro said, each word measured and deliberate. "They matter to the people who work on them. They matter to the audiences who watch them. And they matter to me." Maher rolled his eyes with the kind of theatrical exaggeration that played well to his live audience but felt grotesque up close. "Oh please, spare me the artist speech. You're an entertainer, Bobby. A very good one, don't get me wrong, but let's not pretend you're changing the world with another gangster flick." The disrespect was breathtaking in its casualness. Here was a man who had built his entire career on the foundation of others' creativity, who contributed nothing to the world except his opinions, talking down to one of the greatest actors of all time like he was some struggling newcomer desperate for exposure. "You know what?" De Niro stood up slowly, his full presence filling the small green room. Even at his age, there was something undeniably powerful about the way he carried himself. Like a coiled spring, ready to unleash decades of stored energy. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about why I'm here." Maher's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "No misunderstanding at all, my friend. You're here because your publicist booked you on the biggest political talk show on television. You should be grateful for the platform." Grateful for the platform. The words hit De Niro like a physical blow. This was a man who had worked with Scorsese, Coppola, and every other legendary director of his generation. He had created characters that would live forever in cinema history. And this late-night comedian thought he was doing him a favor? Platform? De Niro's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it commanded more attention than if he had shouted. "You think I need your platform?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even the production assistants bustling around preparing for the show seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Conversations stopped. People started paying attention. Maher, either oblivious to the shift in atmosphere or too arrogant to care, pressed on. "Look, I get it. You're a legend. Hall of Fame. All that jazz. But this isn't 1975 anymore. People's attention spans are different now. They want quick, they want punchy, they want political. Your little art films don't move the needle like they used to." It was a masterclass in missing the point. Maher seemed genuinely convinced that his brand of shallow controversy was somehow more valuable than De Niro's lifetime of artistic achievement. The disconnect was so complete, so tone-deaf, that it bordered on the absurd. De Niro studied Maher's face for a long moment, as if he were preparing for a scene where he needed to understand his character's motivation. What he saw there was everything wrong with modern entertainment: ego without substance, confidence without competence, and, worst of all, complete disrespect for the craft that had given both of them their careers. "You don't get it," De Niro said finally. "You really don't get it at all." The stage manager appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand and headset around his neck. "5 minutes to air, gentlemen. Mr. De Niro, we'll have you out first after Bill's monologue." Maher clapped his hands together with fake enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. Ready to give them a show, Bobby?" But De Niro was already walking toward the door, not to head to the set, but toward the exit. Each step was deliberate, purposeful, like he was walking away from a bad audition that wasn't worth his time. "Where are you going?" Maher called after him, his voice losing some of its cocky confidence for the first time all evening. De Niro paused at the doorway and turned back. The look he gave Maher was the same look he had perfected in dozens of films. The look of a man who had seen enough and wasn't going to waste another second on someone who didn't deserve his time. "I'm going somewhere where people understand the difference between entertainment and exploitation," De Niro said. "Good luck with your show." The stage manager's face went white as he watched one of the biggest names in Hollywood walk toward the exit. His headset crackled with panicked voices from the control room as producers realized their A-list guest was about to disappear 30 seconds before airtime. "Mr. De Niro, please," the stage manager stammered, chasing after the actor with his clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. "We're about to go live. The audience is expecting you." But De Niro didn't slow his pace. His decision was made, and anyone who knew anything about Robert De Niro knew that once he made up his mind, nothing short of an earthquake could change it. Behind him, Maher's voice grew louder and more desperate. "Bobby, come on. Don't be such a prima donna about this. It's just television." The words, "just television," stopped De Niro in his tracks. He turned around slowly, his eyes blazing with the kind of controlled fury that had made him legendary in films like Cape Fear and Heat. When Robert De Niro got angry, he didn't scream or throw tantrums like other actors. Instead, he became dangerously quiet, like a volcano moments before eruption. "Just television?" De Niro repeated, his voice so low that everyone in the hallway had to strain to hear him. "Just television?" Maher, apparently incapable of reading the room, pressed forward with his trademark arrogance. "Look, I get that you take this stuff seriously, but at the end of the day, we're all just here to entertain people. Don't make it more complicated than it has to be." The condescension was breathtaking. Here was a man who had spent his entire career riding the coattails of actual talent, lecturing one of the greatest actors of all time about the nature of entertainment. It was like watching a cover band explain music to Mozart. De Niro took a step closer to Maher, and suddenly the hallway felt much smaller. "You think what I do is just entertainment?" "Well, yeah," Maher shrugged, completely missing the danger in De Niro's tone. "I mean, you pretend to be other people for money. It's not exactly rocket science." The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Every person within earshot, from the lowliest production assistant to the veteran cameraman who had worked with legends for decades, understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Robert De Niro, a man who had dedicated his entire life to the craft of acting, was being dismissed as a pretender by a talk show host whose greatest contribution to culture was making snarky comments about current events. "Pretend to be other people," De Niro repeated slowly, tasting each word like it was something bitter. "Is that what you think I've been doing for 50 years? Maher, either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, doubled down. "Come on, Bobby. Acting is playing dress-up for adults. You memorize some lines, you hit your marks, you collect your paycheck. It's not like you're curing cancer or anything." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient noise of the busy television studio seemed to fade away as everyone processed what they had just heard. Maher had just reduced one of the most respected careers in entertainment history to child's play, and he seemed genuinely proud of himself for doing it. De Niro's response came in the form of a laugh, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that characters in his movies made right before they did something that couldn't be undone. Cold, humorless, and absolutely terrifying. "You know what's funny?" De Niro said, his voice still barely above a whisper. "I've been in this business since before you were old enough to have opinions about anything, and I've never met anyone who understood so little about what we actually do." Maher's smirk was beginning to look forced now, like he was starting to realize that this conversation wasn't going the way he had planned, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Hey, I'm not trying to insult you here. I'm just being honest about what this business really island. Honest? De Niro's voice rose slightly for the first time, and the single word carried more menace than most actors could pack into an entire monologue. You want to talk about honest? The stage manager tried one more time to salvage the situation. Gentlemen, we really need to get to the stage. The show starts in 60 seconds, but neither man was listening to him anymore. This had become something bigger than a television appearance, bigger than a simple disagreement between host and guest. This was about respect, about understanding, about the fundamental difference between someone who creates art and someone who merely comments on it. Let me tell you what's honest, De Niro continued, his Brooklyn accent becoming more pronounced as his anger grew. Honest is spending months preparing for a role, learning everything about a character until you can think like them, breathe like them, become them. Honest is working with directors who pour their hearts into every frame, with writers who spend years crafting stories that matter. Maher waved his hand dismissively, apparently still not grasping the magnitude of his mistake. Oh, spare me the method acting lecture. Half the people in your movies are criminals anyway. How noble can it really be? It was the wrong thing to say to the wrong person at the wrong time. De Niro had portrayed some of the most complex, morally ambiguous characters in cinema history, but he had done so with a depth and humanity that revealed profound truths about the human condition. To reduce that work to simple criminality showed a level of ignorance that was almost impressive in its completeness. Half my movies are about criminals? De Niro's voice was deadly quiet again. What about the king of comedy? What about Awakenings? What about Silver Linings Playbook? Maher shrugged again, that infuriating gesture that conveyed his complete indifference to anything that didn't fit his narrow worldview. Okay, so you've done a few serious movies. Big deal. Most people remember you for Goodfellas and Casino anyway. The dismissal was complete and devastating. Decades of nuanced performances, of working with the greatest filmmakers of multiple generations, of creating characters that had influenced countless other actors, reduced to a handful of gangster roles by someone who had never created anything of lasting value in his entire career. De Niro looked at Maher for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile or an amused smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized that they were wasting their time on someone who would never understand. You know what, Bill? De Niro said, using Maher's first name for the first time all evening. You're absolutely right. Maher blinked, confused by the sudden change in tone. I am? You're right that this isn't rocket science, De Niro continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. Rocket science is actually easier. With rocket science, you either get to the moon or you don't. With what I do, you're trying to touch something deeper than space, something more mysterious than physics. You're trying to find truth in fiction, reality in pretense. The words hit like punches, each one perfectly timed and devastatingly accurate. Maher's smirk was completely gone now, replaced by the dawning realization that he had picked a fight with someone who was operating on a completely different level. But you wouldn't understand that, De Niro said, his tone still conversational but with an edge that could cut glass. Because understanding requires respect, and respect requires humility, and humility requires admitting that there might be things in this world that are bigger than your ego. The control room's voice crackled through the stage manager's headset. 30 seconds to air. Where's De Niro? But Robert De Niro was already walking away again, this time with a purpose that made it clear he wouldn't be coming back. Each step echoed in the suddenly quiet hallway as one of Hollywood's greatest legends walked away from what should have been a simple publicity appearance. Behind him, Maher's voice cracked with desperation as the reality of the situation finally hit him. You can't just walk out. Do you know how many people are watching? This is career suicide. De Niro stopped one final time, but he didn't turn around. His voice carried clearly down the hallway, every word measured and final. My career survived 40 years without you, Bill. I think it'll manage just fine. The stage manager was practically hyperventilating now, speaking rapidly into his headset while chasing after De Niro. Control room, we have a situation. Guest is leaving. I repeat, guest is leaving the building. But Maher wasn't done. His ego, bruised and bleeding, demanded one last attempt to salvage his dignity. Fine. Walk away. Run back to your little art house movies that nobody watches. See how relevant you are without platforms like mine. The words echoed through the hallway like gunshots. Every crew member, Every assistant, every person within earshot felt the impact of what had just been said. Maher had just accused Robert De Niro, a man whose films had grossed billions of dollars and influenced generations of filmmakers, of being irrelevant. De Niro turned around one last time, and the look on his face was something that would be burned into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even disappointment. It was pity, pure and simple. The kind of pity you might feel for someone who was so lost that they couldn't even see how lost they were. "You know what's really sad, Bill?" De Niro said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine sorrow. "You actually believe that. You actually think that what you do here matters more than what artists create. You think controversy is the same thing as significance." Maher opened his mouth to respond, but De Niro held up a hand, stopping him cold. "I've worked with Scorsese, with Coppola, with directors whose names will be remembered long after your show is canceled and forgotten. I've been part of films that changed the way people think about cinema, about storytelling, about what it means to be human. And you think I need your permission to be relevant?" The control room voice was screaming through the headset now. 10 seconds to air, we need the guest on stage now." But there was no guest. There was only Robert De Niro, standing in a hallway, delivering what amounted to a masterclass in dignity to a man who had never learned the meaning of the word. "Here's what you don't understand," De Niro continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a teacher explaining something to a particularly slow student. "Real art doesn't need platforms. Real art creates its own platform. When people watch Taxi Driver or Raging Bull 50 years from now, they won't remember what talk show I was on that week. They'll remember the truth we put on that screen." Maher's face was red now, a mixture of embarrassment and fury that made him look like a child throwing a tantrum. "You're making a huge mistake. Nobody walks out on Bill Maher. Nobody." The desperation in his voice was painful to hear. This was a man who had built his entire identity around being the smartest person in the room, the guy who could take down anyone with his wit and insight. But faced with someone who possessed real substance, real achievement, real gravitas, he was revealed to be exactly what De Niro had seen from the beginning, a shallow provocateur with nothing meaningful to offer. "You're right about one thing," De Niro said, pausing at the exit door. "Nobody has walked out on you before. But that's not because you're so important. It's because most people need the publicity more than they need their self-respect." The words landed like a final, devastating blow. Maher stood frozen in the hallway, surrounded by crew members who were avoiding eye contact, knowing they had just witnessed their boss being systematically dismantled by someone who operated on a completely different level of professionalism and artistry. "Fortunately," De Niro continued, pushing open the exit door, "I've never been most people." The door swung shut behind him with a soft click that somehow managed to sound like thunder. Inside the studio, the theme music was playing, the audience was applauding, and somewhere in the control room, producers were scrambling to figure out how to fill the time that was supposed to belong to one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Maher stood alone in the hallway, his empire of smugness crumbling around him. For the first time in his career, his quick wit had failed him. His provocative style had backfired spectacularly. His platform, which he had wielded like a weapon for so many years, had been revealed as the hollow stage it truly was when faced with someone of genuine substance. The stage manager's voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Maher, they need you on stage. The show is starting." But Bill Maher didn't move. He couldn't move. He stood there in his expensive suit, in his own studio, surrounded by his own employees, and for the first time in his professional life, he felt truly small. Not intellectually small or professionally small, but small in the way that only comes from being confronted with your own limitations by someone who operates without them. Outside in the parking lot, Robert De Niro climbed into his car without looking back. He had said everything that needed to be said, done everything that needed to be done. His dignity intact, his principles uncompromised. He drove away from what should have been a routine television appearance, but had instead become a defining moment that would be talked about for years to come. Behind him, a television studio struggled to begin a show without its star guest, while a host who had built his career on tearing others down discovered what it felt like to be on the receiving end of true artistic authority. The king of late-night controversy had finally met someone who was genuinely unimpressed by his crown, and the encounter had left him speechless in the one place where words were supposed to be his greatest weapon. The show, as they say, had to go on. But it would go on without Robert De Niro, and somehow, that made all the difference in the world.